Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner. I'm getting a little feedback from somebody. Might be you, Brannos.
Uh-oh.
Just for a second. Sorry. We have a great group of coaches here tonight who are going to talk about how we can work on breaking some bad habits in our fighting and trying to turn them into better habits. Please drop any questions you have into the comments. We love questions. They love answering, love the interaction. So be sure to drop those in there. And with that, I'm going to disappear and hand it off to you, Brannos.
Great. Thank you very much for introducing us. And so we're going to hopefully have a great night for you guys tonight. We have Duke Ronald with us. Previously, way back time machine-wise, back in the West for his first crown and then the East, and still resides in the East now. And then Duke Brennan, who I just learned today totally threw me under the bus all the time and tells me to go fight the guys that are going to crush me every time I get a chance. So we'll make up for that later. But for now,
it is done with the utmost of respect.
So we're going to try to keep it a little bit fun and educational. I think this is what's I was kind of diving into this one after Ron kind of came up with a really nice syllabus of the stuff to go through. And I started diving in a little bit. And I think I posted it today. I'm like, it's amazing how much more I learn every one of these episodes we do. It's, my education around coaching and teaching, I look and I like, after doing it for, 30 plus years, I look and I'm like, why didn't I know this stuff? And some of it naturally comes out, but it's really nice when you know the details. And so hopefully we're going to share some of those with you today too. Once again, please post up questions. We love questions. It makes our episodes that much better. And we only have a couple coaches with us, so we're probably going to roll through a lot of stuff. This is going to be one of those episodes, I have a feeling, that you'll probably want to go back and listen to just so you can get more detail, because it might be one that you start drowning out after a half hour or an hour, because there's probably going to be a lot of stuff going on. But we're going to try to present as much as we can, as clear as we can, and have a little good time and answer some questions along the way. So Ron, you posted up kind of a list, a great starting list for this episode. We talked about this a long time ago, and you put some work into it and came up with a great little kind of outline. Tell me why you actually want to do this episode. Why did you want to do this episode?
Well, I've been training people for probably about 40 years at this point, since I was a teenager myself. And I've always been horrified by seeing people who are poorly trained, and people who have bad habits are allowed to keep going. And back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have the depth of knowledge we have now concerning long-term, stress on your knees, on your elbows, on your shoulders, and on your brain. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, people liked really close-fitting helmets, and back then you didn't have 12-gauge helmets. They were like 16 and 14-gauge mild steel. So I mean, you had people that had a 3/8 of an inch of foam in a 16-gauge helmet, and they'd go out and they'd fight people swinging a 3-pound rattan stick at them. And a number of these people over the years retired because they just started, losing their faculties. I know several people that just couldn't take being hit anymore because they had too many concussions. And, so we've learned so much since then that, I kind of put it together in a list, which is the outline I sent you.
Yep. And we're going to burn through that one. So, on that point, well, before we keep going, Brennan, I was happy you decided to jump in on this episode. Is there something here that you kind of wanted to just, was it an opportunity to learn a little bit, or did you have some stuff you like to share too?
Yeah. So for me, this is totally selfish. I am in the process of rebuilding my fighting times, for the 17th time. And I think Ron is one of the great trainers, certainly in our kingdom in the East and around. So I'm happy to be here and see what my bad habits are and what are some of the ways that I can work on breaking them. And I know that I get the opportunity to pass on some of that to some of my students. And so this is really about, for me, being able to soak in a lot of that thinking.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you joined us, man. And I guess that's, we'll probably get to that point about, how do we make change? Because actually, it's not a bad habit necessarily, although maybe it is now. Maybe it wasn't back in the day and it worked for you. But times change and techniques change, and we learn a lot of different things. So we may cover some of that as well. How do we make that, that habit change to different habits? So it doesn't always have to be bad habits. It could just be making change. So Ron, let's start with your first one, and that is, you have a couple of pieces here of the main sources of bad habits, and your first bad habit you had on here is bad training, and right. God, we've seen that.
Yep. Well, I was incredibly blessed where I grew up as a teenager. I had Paula Bellatrix come to my local practice every week, and he created a dojo type atmosphere. The first half an hour of practice was Paul teaching the snap and offside. He was teaching something, and with 14-year-old me, he had the patience of Job. He wouldn't let me stop doing it until I got it right, and he was very patient. He never yelled, but working with a 14-year-old me was really tough for him because I just wasn't getting it. So I grew up in an area where you had 3 practices within 50 miles of my house that all had great trainers like Sagan and Paul and Andrew Vriga and William Lucky and Stephen McHenry. We had, I had, whatever I wanted to learn, there was somebody there who could teach it to me. But I was always amazed when I went to foreign wars, I went to out of area events, I'd be like, why are these people fighting so badly? And people sometimes had fought, so because I was in a bubble and I didn't realize it. So when I came out to the East, you were either part of a household that had a knight that trained you, or they put a sword in your hand, a spun bull helmet on your head, and blue plastic barrel armor, and you fought at Penzic, and you were kind of fodder. And I was horrified by that. So I started up a practice that everybody was welcome to, not just my household. And I started training people, including a lot of the rejects from the local groups, and or people that were shunned by them because they might have had too much natural ability or whatever. They didn't want to be beaten by somebody. So I mean, that's so that's kind of how I got that whole thing rolling. But that's one thing. The other is, oddly enough, having natural talent.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That can be a fountain of bad habits. If you're naturally extremely fast or extremely strong or athletic in some way, that can become a crutch. And I've known a number of people over the years that they're fast and they can beat people in their experience range just on hand speed. But and what I tell these people is, I'm like, look, I'm not working with you to beat the people at your local practice or to beat the people in your peer group. I'm working with you so you can beat anybody. And a lot of people, including most of your top people, have got good hand speed. So if you've only got hand speed, they're going to crush you. And there are people that I sent to, I remember going out with one person, name not important, but he's a Duke in our kingdom now, to an Estrella. And he was convinced speed is all he needed. So I introduced him to Duke Radnor, to Duke Torgal, to Duke Guy, and they all crushed the crap out of him because they had his hand speed or better, and they had a lot more skill to back it up. And the the third type that I've seen are people that come from other martial arts or disciplines, and they may be very good at, you know, whatever martial art they did or whatever other group like ours that they did, but it's not always transferable. And, you know, and I've seen some people come from other groups like Duke Sven from Anstiora, who took what he did in his foam group and adapted towards the SCA and did a phenomenal job of it. So it can be done. It's just too many people go, well, you know, my group, we use, you know, foam covered swords and we tap each other, and they go in the SCA and they use no body mechanics. They tap somebody and go, well, why isn't this working? I'm like, well, because we do a different thing.
Yeah, and you know, I guess, you know, let's go ahead and we're going to dive into those three things now. You know, bad training. I mean, that one's always a hard one, and I agree with you. When I came in, we didn't even have the mid was full of households as well, and I think, you know, the East and the mid were the same because of Penzing. You know, and big households popped up and fighting units were big, and you know, I think in some ways we got a lot of bad habits and bad training because most of our focus was on melee. And the second part, it was as easy to default back to the great equalizer, and that is melee. So it's really super easy to be good when you can hit the guy that's not looking at you. So, you know, and so, you know, so you didn't have to worry about training because you got all of that. You know, I think, and here's a key, and we're going to talk about this. The key in creating habits is the reward. Habits are created out of the reward of how you feel. And so, you know, I think in a melee scenario, people tended into the melee scenario because you have some reward there. In other words, I can hit somebody. So I like it here. I go and train. Well, all of these guys are better than me. I'm not really winning, and you're not feeling like you're getting an award and reward. And we're going to dive later. We'll dive a little deeper into that. But you know, I think that's one of the big parts about training. For me, natural talent is one of the hardest ones. I quote this story all the time, and that is, I'd rather take a guy that's 30% consistently winning against people he should, and 70% losing against people he probably should too, than a person that's winning 70% against whoever because he's throwing so much energy out there and losing 30%. Now, everybody be like, well, that guy's better. He's not necessarily better. In fact, it makes it even harder to train him because, again, it's about that reward. As soon as you start training him and he falls back and starts losing more, like he should be, probably, because he doesn't have a lot of technique, they immediately want to go back to what feels good and rewarding. And that's Brennan, come on, tell us, give us some example.
Yeah, so I am currently about 6 months into the first time in my life using a thrusting tip, and I'm trying to build that into my repertoire, and it's just not there. And I'm trying to do it in ways that aren't just scissor. We've all seen the guy with the new thrusting tip who's just scissor happy, and really build it into the flow of the fight. And that is really hard for me. And I had the debate with myself driving home on Wednesday. Man, maybe I should just cut this off of my sword and go back to what I've been doing.
No, I say no, man. I think the big piece is going to be finding those small rewards. You know, it's like it goes down to that. We'll talk about that later too. But finding the same thing Sean talks about all the time is finding those smaller rewards. That reward may not actually be killing somebody, but the execution and flow and the feeling of it is the reward itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you're talking about with training those 70-30, 30-70 guys is it is so difficult to show them in the pools where you and I and Ronald operate those rewards. where you have to take them outside of the places that they operate all the time, because they're fighting you and Ronald and me and the folks around us that we have trained or been trained with. And then you put them in a totally different pool, and suddenly that's where they see those rewards. And it is really hard to get folks to get in the car for 4 hours to get those rewards.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I think that's one of the big things we'll get out of tonight's talk a little bit is, that system of how do we get there? How do we break the habits? And we're going to dive into some more stuff here in a second, but, how do we even identify them? So, but, the other thing, Ron, that Ron talked about was martial arts and other sports. And Ron, you nailed it with Sven. But even he had some help. I mean, he found somebody there, Duke Drake, and he was able to help him understand a little better. And he's really created a style from a mix between what he did where he was and what he needs to do in the SCA that works. And it's worked for a lot of people, mostly through something actually they're talking about in the comments here, and that is really hard work. Right. And it's, some people come in talented. Others become great through hard work, and they start with nothing, maybe start with no talent.
Yeah. So I always tell people the greatest natural talent you can have is being able to listen and learn. If you can do that, you can beat people way more physically talented than you that don't.
And then I think the next piece is that willing to adapt and fail, to overcome, like what Brennan you're doing right now. And because that's not easy. That's not easy for somebody that's already good. It'd be super easy for Brennan to go, I'm going to go throw this tip away. I'm not going to bother. I just keep hitting people like I normally do. So, but
it's disheartening.
What's that?
It's disheartening to work on something new and just get snapped in the face while you're working it. And the guys that you were once beating are beating you while you're, and one of the things that is tough about breaking these habits is that we don't operate in a true dojo style. We don't, in the SCA, we don't operate in everybody's working on skill X. I go to practice on Wednesday and I'm working on skill X. And my opponent is sometimes working on that skill with me, and sometimes they're not working on that skill sometimes they're my training partner, and sometimes they're my opponent. And we don't have that dojo. We're all going to work on this skill together.
Yes. And we've been actually relatively lucky here, and some groups are lucky, like Ron fell into, and that is, there's work at the beginning of practice, and then there's independent study with like walk through techniques and things, new techniques. We even drill before our practices, ladder drills, movement drills. And then you have to add sparring. And in the end, at some point, you have to add that competition, that tournament, because all of those things are different. They're all different, essentially things you have to learn. So, but I agree with you. There's not enough of it happening, and there's really not enough. And this goes back to what Ron was saying about bad training. There's not enough people, and it's not even the teacher this time or the coach. There's not enough people willing to even listen.
Right.
That's the hard one. All right. So, I don't think we beat this one to death, and I think there's a ton more probably, but I have a feeling we're going to kind of get into it in the next few things here. So the next one, explaining why doing it correct is better. So, Ron, do you want to go ahead and what were you talking about with that statement?
Well, that's a tough one to do with some people, because if somebody's having success, they're winning tournament fights, they're beating people at practice. It's tough to say, well, what you're doing is wrong, because they don't see it as wrong. They see it as, I'm winning. Why, how could this be wrong? you know, and generally how I explain it to them is in several ways. If what they're doing is, for lack of a better term ergonomically unsound, I explain to them that, you know, this mean, you know, if you have to ice your shoulder after every practice, though that's an extreme example, but if you find you're a little bit sore after you throw the shot a lot, over the years, your shoulder is going, or your elbow or whatever is going to get hurt worse and worse. And I say, look, trust me, surgery and rehab suck. So, you know, and I've talked to a number of people, especially people who throw high reps. You know, to me, that's a bad habit. Sure, it's effective against a lot of people, especially if you're tall, but you will pay for it down the road. And you know, I mean, shoulder surgery sucks, just right out, you know. I also explained that, you know, that using proper body mechanics and proper form also lets you fight longer in a day, because you're not just throwing with your arm, you're throwing with everything. And basically it's like, you know, it's more like you got to get a whole workout as opposed to just your arm. So not, you know, and it helps you as you get in the later rounds of a tournament, because you're not quite as tired in one place. You're sort of overall, you know, working it out. I for lack of a better term.
Nope, I totally I get you there, and I think that's where your next point comes to. And you know, I think some of those common mistakes, you know, like you're talking, is you do something, and again we get into this bad habit. We do something that's effective, but it's also hurting you at the same time.
Right.
But you chase the effective instead. Right.
Now, you know, it's not just, you know, as we'll get to more later on in the show, but it's not just your form. It's also how you balance your weapons, how you balance your shield. Mm-hmm. I had a Grand Squire that had a shield that was horribly balanced, and he said, "Make me a bigger shield." And I'm like, well, let's balance your shield, right? So I gave him a perfectly balanced shield. He went out with it, fought, did well all day, thought it was the greatest thing in the world, got home, put it next to his other shield in the garage, and called me and went, hey, it's the same size. I'm like, I wanted it bigger. I'm like, did you do better with it? He's like, yeah. Get there.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was almost like in Spinal Tap when the interviewer was interviewing the one guy with the amp, and he said, mine goes to 11. He's like, why don't you just make 10 louder? It was kind of like talking to him, because he just was convinced that bigger for a shield was better. And I'm like, better balanced is better. But
so, you know, I'm going to throw this one out just in, and I'm going to see if maybe, although you might be watching the show a little bit off time, but so one of our other coaches, Sagan, is out there commenting out there, and it's awesome seeing him comment, because we were just talking about him before the show. He brought up a comment. He said, yes, but what level of fighters are they successful by doing it wrong? And I think that what he's talking about is, you know, the level of, you know, they can do something wrong but still win, right? And I guess that's, you know, that's one of those bad habits that, you know, that really came from maybe just experimenting, right? Back, you know, hey, here's your armor, you're going to spar, and then you get a couple of wins with some shot that's probably may have poor technique, may just be a bad shot, but he's good. But the local guys aren't good enough to block it yet until it's ingrained, because he hasn't gone to a practice, he hasn't gone to an event yet, because, you know, in 6 months, and then he goes and he finds out later that, you know, even maybe much later, maybe it's even good against medium level people, but then when he hits the top ranks, it just breaks down, right? But now it's ingrained, so it becomes rarely difficult.
The crown my second crown that I won, I woke up the next day and my sword arm did not move. I moved it by grabbing it with the other arm and moving it. And I knew going into that, my wrap technique stunk. But I also knew it was going to work against the guy I needed to hit. And sometimes you make that decision, but it has to be a decision. And if you don't know that it's a decision that you're making, then it's just bad technique that you're. And I've since rebuilt it. And now I can throw a rap and still sign my name the next day. But at the time, I couldn't. At the time, if I threw 3 or 4 raps in a day, my arm was useless for 2 days. And so it is not limited to beating guys at low level or at medium level. You can use poor technique at a high level and be successful, and like Ron says, really hurt yourself doing it. There are raps in particular are a real good way to be not ergonomic.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think I think this is a good point that Ron made, was that your body will pretty there's a number of things your body will tell you. Not every trainer they kind of know from experience what usually breaks down normal people, but not that's far and few between. But ultimately, you have to listen to your body, because even if a trainer gives you a good shot that works for you and that is good technique for a lot of people, it may not be for you. And there's that place where you're like, hey, this hurts when I do this, and you have to also be willing to communicate back to your teachers and trainers, because they may not be noticing something small. They may not be noticing something small that your wrist is bent, or that you're not applying enough tension at the end of the blow. So what happens is you got a floppy hand, and then it's getting jolted. So there's a number of items that now they can look for more detail of why it's hurting, or they may just say, okay, maybe this ain't for you. Let's change it up a little until we find the space that works for you, that's comfortable. So, but a lot of times, and especially in the old days, it was like, you're going to do it this way, and that's the right way. And the good part is at least you're being told, because a lot of people never got told anything. I think our teaching and our training have constantly is working on getting better and better. I think that we're learning from modern teachers and not even martial art teachers necessarily, but real modern teachers, what benefits, people in how to help people learn better. I'll have a couple examples later around this, but I think that's a big part of the game is that, I did a lot of yelling at people and a lot of pain association learning, when I was, for a lot of years. We're all smiling here a little bit, right? Because, it was just, I was one of those coaches. I'd apologize to people. I'm like, I'm going to yell at you, and I'll, and when you do something right, I will tell you did it right, and I'll be super happy for you. But you're going to get both ends. So, and maybe some of that has changed, and with a lot of education now, that yelling coach at people, it is a way to coach. It helps a certain type of student. Other students just can't do it. So, you have to evaluate what your student is and what they need. Some students do absolutely need some tough love to motivate them, to get them to focus. Other students, you give them tough love and they lock down, and you'll never teach them again that day. So, and I love your, in this group of, explain what you're doing correctly, or, correctly is better. So, the idea is explaining, so some of this is explaining how they can do something better later too. So, I think we get into that a little bit deeper, but the one I really wanted to call out was convincing fighters that proper warm-up is important. Man, can we ever do that? Is that ever going to happen? I'm not quite sure.
Not in our lifetime.
That's I mean, to be the truth, I warm up now because I have to.
Well, Well, that was part of what was fortunate in my training was Paul and Brannos and William Lucky and all the other people and Sagan and all the other people I worked with were very big on not only warming up, but making sure you have proper technique through your warm up. Because too many people just kind of sort of throw shots however they can to get the shot in there. And that's not the point of warming up. Point of warming up is to get yourself loosened up so you do less soft tissue damage. And I was fortunate, and when I was a teenager, I bitched about it a lot. I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to fight. And they were like, this is better, and since these people could hurt me, I followed what they said. So these habits were instilled in me when I was 14, 15 years old. So they are burned into me. And that's one of the things I instill in my students is that, warming up is essential to longevity in the sport. There's some people out there who could probably not do it and be fine, but us mere mortals aren't like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump over to this one, and I'm going to throw this at you, Brennan, because you actually I think you just covered it mostly, but let's dig it into it a little bit. The question is it bad technique if it causes injury?
So I think one, there is no one true path up the mountain, right? And my wrist does not operate exactly the same as Ron's wrist, does not operate exactly the same as Brannos' wrist. You have general principles that are true that we know, but there's degrees of flexibility. And so if it hurts you, don't do it. I mean, there are ways through footwork, through angles, through positioning, to throw every shot in a way that does not cause you pain and injury. You can hit the bad guy with your stick without hurting yourself. I promise you, there's a way to do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and going back to the stretching thing that we were just making fun of a little bit, but Ron nailed it on the head. I used to throw some fast stuff with a lot of full extension, almost throwing it out there. And some of that was starting to hurt my elbow. I worked through that a different way. I worked through that stretching the things into place where I could extend without hyperextension. And that was a big key. And I've rarely had issue with it because I actually stretched almost all the time doing that, making sure I don't get into hyperextension. So there's ways to make something, you may have a technique that's like works, but it hurts because you don't have a good stretch on your body. I was just reading another book and at the end, actually it was Gary Goggins. I always want to say Gary, but I think I'll have to look it up, but so he's a SEAL. Through his whole life, he's just abused himself. He's a ultra marathonist and everything else. And at the end of his career, he was so locked down, he thought he was done with everything, including walking. And what he found was that his muscles in his body over all of that time just started locking up. And then he went to a friend of his that was not even a yoga person, but more of a person that worked primarily all stretching. And he started stretching 4 hours a day. And he started doing that religiously because he's a maniac. And after like 6 months, he had no problem walking. In fact, he was running better and faster times than he was even before when he was in good condition, because his body just, over time, you abuse that body enough, it's going to try to stop you from abusing it. And that's what was happening. So just beware. There are ways, but be careful on the joints you do it. If you can't get past it over a short period of time or, medium period of time, then I wouldn't keep doing it, because you're just, you might have it for a couple of years and then you won't have nothing. So Ron, you have anything on that?
No, I'm good.
All right, let's jump to number 3 here. I love this one because I think we've all had them. Dealing with but it works for me. So
I've never had that student, but I promise you I have been that student.
Yeah. And by the way, in our Brennan fixed it. It's not Gary, it's David Goggins. So if you haven't read it, he has a great book. He's a SEAL. He went through all kinds of training and stuff. Great book. So you've been that student, huh?
It is my natural instinct. I still fight it. The things that I do that work for me have gotten me, like Hansa out in the West talks about. He talks about my ceiling with what I'm doing versus my ceiling versus with what I could be doing, and I think that's a real big deal with. But it works for me.
So that's your cop out.
Yeah. Oh, totally that guy. I am Mr. Easy Path. If I can take it, I will take it. And I am fighting. It's why I'm here tonight, is because I know that about me, and I am trying to work on that about me.
All right. Well, that's a good one. So Ron, how do you handle that? I mean, you wrote this.
I've had a number of students over the years that had, and that goes back to my natural ability thing, because somebody's naturally strong or naturally fast, they feel they can do things that are really stupid, and they work for them against low level and mid level fighters, and most of these kind of people don't really get into the big pond. And I was working with somebody who wanted to be, and eventually became one of my squires and went on to become a count, that the first time I ever fought him, he used a heater shield, and he had it down as low as he could get it around his legs, and he blocked everything from like his mid chest up with his sword. And I'm like, and I was watching him just beat up the people in his local area, and I'm like, that's not going to work. He's like, I'm like, you're too fast, and he's like, that's the, he literally told me that's the stupidest thing he ever heard. And what I did was basically I timed him. I just kept beating him down. Like, he couldn't block a shot from me because I just kept timing him. I'm like, this is why what you're doing is wrong. Now, I might have hit him a little too hard, here and there, but I got the point across because he was really belligerent about it. I find that you show them what the flaw in their bad habit is. In that case, it was the fact that if you threw any kind of feints or fakes at him, he reacted to them in lightning speed, leaving whatever you wanted to hit open, so you could just hit it over and over again. You basically figure out what the flaw in their plan is, and you just beat it out of them. I mean, you don't hurt them, but you basically show them what the error of their ways is.
Yeah, and I guess that's one way. 100%. I mean, it's a good, that's that negative reinforcement way. And sometimes people need to actually see, it's like, I can just do this over and over again until you're ready to give up and learn.
Right.
So this is helping them empty their cup. Right. And that, I think that's a big part, because some people just, this is exactly what we're talking about. They don't believe until it happens. And, this is, I think in a lot of ways, we were talking about this with somebody else just the other night, is the gift, actually, the biggest gift somebody can give you is a defeat, because you get an opportunity to learn. And it's not necessarily easy to learn in your wins. So especially when you're really climbing those levels, and when here we go, Brennan, when you're coasting and winning, there's no reason to change, right?
Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Oh, I love it, brother. So, I think that there's a couple of ways to work with that, and I think Ron's 100%. He kind of nailed it on helping show, but you're showing them. So now you're emptying their cup, but he also talks about explaining why. And I think that's the big part, I think, and I do a lot of this myself. It's like, I don't just want you to do the technique. I want you to understand the technique and why. Because the more you understand it, and I say this all the time to people, the more I can help you understand it, the more likely when it breaks down, because it will over time, it's easier to find out what is wrong with it again. If you don't know why you're doing it, you never actually even realize it broke down. This is what comes from the naturally talented people. They're naturally talented until stuff starts breaking down, and then they don't know how to fix it because they never learned it. They just use use that empty mind and just let it flow, right? And this you get this a lot from people are like, they're really good, but they're like, I can't teach people. And it's because they don't understand what they're doing. And that comes with, unfortunately, that comes with the bad side of that is what happens when they start they know that something changes in their style. Nobody else can explain it to them. And they don't know what it is either because they've never learned it deep enough to teach it to somebody else.
Well, one of the ways I train people because when I train somebody, I don't just train them to fight. I also train them to critique and to be a coach eventually themselves. So what we do after a lot of practices is I say, okay, what do you think you're doing wrong? I want, and what do you think the other fighters are doing wrong? And I include me in that. I say, okay, what am I doing wrong? What flaws in my style do you see? And a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't know how to tell you that. You're my trainer. I'm like, that's part of the deal we're training you to be not only a trainer, but part of being a good fighter is being able to identify flaws and bad habits in other fighters and knowing how to take advantage of them. So it's a tough thing to teach somebody, but it's well worth it in the end.
No, I agree. I think it's primary, and we all know, right? We all got to that point where we're starting to show people stuff, and then you really had to think about it, and you started thinking about it more and more, and then you start actually digging it. You're in your own fight. You're like, oh man, I tell them to do this, but I do this. And then you're like, oh, I better do it right. Right. And so what's happening is you're reinforcing, your good techniques, and you're diving deep into those. And if you find that it's like, oh, wait, I'm explaining it wrong to them, then you can go fix it. Right. But, if you never train that, you're fundamentally lost. And, and training somebody helps you because I have brand new guys that do something very well. They pick it up really well. And I'm like, you're going to go over there and show that guy how you did that. You're going to run a 15-minute class on how you throw that breaking snap. Or you're going to run a 15-minute class on how you threw this offside leg so well. Because first thing is, that's the reward for doing something well. Second is they get to learn it even better. And third, they get to give back to somebody, right? And be part of the community even more so. So there's a lot of wins on that cycle. I would hope that everybody gives everybody a chance to do those kinds of things. And to tell you the truth, people like Brennan and Ron, they could go and, at the same time that person is training, having a small class, they could pull off somebody that's having either a lot of problems with something or somebody that needs a tweak, a tiny tweak that it would just pass over everybody else, not worth talking about, but that person needs it. He's already on the top of the game. He just needs to kick it up that much more. They can spend that time talking to them about that. Well, it really, it's a good place. And I think it's super important, this point. So,
yeah. And to that point, it doesn't matter how far you get into this. You always need little tweaks, as you just said. Like last Penzic, we spent some time working on footwork because I've probably got some of the worst footwork in the known world. I mean, the only thing that saved me is I got really good hands, but my footwork is terrible. And, I learned some things from you working on footwork there. So
there's always a place to learn, right?
Yeah.
For me, the place that that evolution you're talking about came was when I started doing video work on myself.
Oh yeah.
And I really thought, like, I have a good offside leg. It's probably my best shot. And I really thought I threw it XYZ. I don't throw it that way at all. But when I put it on video and I broke it down, oh, I actually throw it ABC, and now I can teach it. And it wasn't until I broke down my own fights on video that I was able to teach the things I did to other people.
Yeah, and now you have even a deeper understanding of it, which is even better, right?
Yeah.
So and we'll talk a little bit about video later in another article I have up, but yeah, I found the same thing. And really in the last 3 years, I've had a student or two or three that pushed me and said, I caught the first thing you said, but I'm done now after the other pieces. So, what was happening is I learned is we string things along because we think it's simple, but it's like, hey, your foot should be pointed this way. And then you need to be on your toes, and each piece had to be explained and practiced.
But that foot point is so revolutionary to some folks. Like, oh, this just changed my balance. It changed the trajectory and the delivery point of every shot I throw. And so now I need to spend the whole practice just working on pointing my foot that way. And maybe next week, maybe in the practice on Tuesday, I'll get to the part 1A, but I'm still on point my foot that way. And I think that we skip those moments too much and let those toe points happen all the time without fixing them and letting them soak.
Yep. No, I would agree 100%. 100%. So we're probably a little off track on dealing with, but it works for me. But to tell you the truth, it's organic. It rolled into its organic place, right? Because we were talking about breaking down details of why this person should think about, why it may be a better technique. So I don't think we went terribly off, and I think it was a good conversation. But let's move on to your number 4, Ron. And that's the armor issues.
Well, there's plenty of bad habits in that regard. As we're talking in the pre-show discussion, there, a lot of people in the early, especially like in the mid-late 80s, around that period, as things got a little more, competitive, they started going to lighter stuff. They want to be more competitive. So, I mean, there's a number of people, including several Dukes of that period, that wore helmets that were like 16 gauge or 14 gauge. I mean, 12 gauge helmets almost didn't exist back then, except for very few people making them. And they put like 3/8 of an inch of padding in them, and they're like, and some of them, from what I talked to them about, they're like, well, I'm a Duke, I don't get hit like the rest of you do, but yeah, you do, and and you're also not a good example when you do that. But but as we've learned from football and from other sports, traumatic brain injuries are a thing. And one of the things that I've read they're learning about is it's not just the traumatic shots that you take; it's all the little shocks to your head that accumulate too. And that's how I try to explain to people. They're like, well, I want to be able to move faster. I don't want that much weight on my head. And I'm like, well, what do you want? Do you want a 10-year fighting career where you end up with permanent brain damage, or do you want to do this longer and be able to recognize your wife when you're 70? But also the effects of not wearing proper gear. They may take years to manifest, but they will manifest eventually. It's like, joints are breakable, especially.
Oh yeah.
And over time, it's like you're gonna get calcification, You know, I mean, I've been doing this almost 45 years, and even though I've always tried to wear, you know, fairly protective equipment, I'm feeling it now.
Yep. You know, and it's interesting because we get into that armor piece, and you know, there's a couple of people I know that had issues from actually wearing too much armor or armor that fit poorly, and we had whole episodes on this, right? And there's so this just feeds into that idea. If you have armor that's hurting you when you're doing good technique, it's probably not good armor, and you should probably fix that. If you have, you know, armor that, you know, that doesn't cover or falls off the areas that need to be covered, like your joints, you know, I get it. We all like being comfortable, but yeah, you know, joint armor. There's a reason why there's rules in the society and why we have those things, right? And probably the biggest one, and you know, I fall right into that space, because I don't wear a ton of armor. I probably wear more armor now than I did back then, is leg armor. You know, I see way too many people. This is what I usually see, is a bunch of Dukes not wearing leg armor because they don't get hit in the legs often. And then the brand new guy comes to practice and doesn't have leg armor now, and he's getting crushed. And over time, that is, you know, you know, it will cause damage. He's just, you know, there's way too many blows being taken, and that idea of just to the head, the blows to the head are bad. Repetitive blows, probably anywhere over time, is not a great thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, you definitely want to be careful on that thing. And, you know, it's our producer posted up here is like, it is also a great way to run people off. Right. So I think it's super important. You know, Brendan, what do you wear on your legs?
I don't wear leg armor. The thing that I was thinking about as you were talking about that is, so Cullen and I don't really wear a lot on our legs, haven't worn a lot on our legs for forever. And we have a whole crop of younger, newer fighters with creases. And it is, as we are getting older, we are seeing it, and we're seeing it in the folks that we train that, you know, trying to walk on Sunday stinks when your leg is purple. So there's a lot of work that folks are doing as we have this whole crop of Dukes that are getting older and that have to stretch before every fight and warm up before every fight and
whatever.
What's that?
I think he's calling me out, Ron.
Yeah.
I have to now. No, I have to stretch and warm up. And I'm the youngin on this call, I think. But
my AOA is older than you are.
That is distinctly possible, sir. But yeah, I don't wear leg armor, but my students do.
Awesome. And you know, I guess I'm going to throw this one out there because it's another subject that I don't think it actually got brought up in a show, but it did get brought up in one of the conversations on Coach's Corner, and that is there's a lot around time in armor or time thinking about fighting, or, you know, it's a lot of Eastern European countries follow this rule. It's like people go every day. It doesn't mean necessarily they're sparring every day. They're not abusing their bodies to a point where they have to take time off to recover. Because if I can go every day and push myself 50, 60%, and always be working on stuff, I could be working foam. I could be working, you know, any of these types of things. I could shadow, I could be chase drills, any of those kinds of things. And I get 4 hours in a day, and I'm doing it 5 days a week. Well, I got 20 hours in. Now, if I go to practice and put 4 hours in, and probably not going to get 4 hours because I'm going to be sparring hard and we're going to be hitting each other. And so probably getting a little less time, but I'm going to be good about it because, you know, I'll equal things out. So I'm going to get 4 hours, but now I have to take 1-2 days off. So the max I'm going to get in is maybe 3 days, maybe 4 days a week at best. And your body is constantly, if it's not recovering, it's constantly degrading and you're getting less time in. But so now you're losing 8 hours of training a week. And, you know, so the piece here is by wearing that armor, you're going to get more time in because you don't have as much recovery to do over bruising and, you know, hell, you get a concussion, you're out for a while, you know, and that's a number of weeks, and that really does set you back. And not only does it set you back, but it sets doubt in your head, and that's the first wedge that's like, should I keep doing this? And as soon as that wedge is in there, it's next to impossible to get out. And you use that as and I say a wedge in your head because you will use it to pry the door open to leave. So be careful about those things. A helmet is critical. So Ron, I think you nailed it here on making sure that we're talking about this because it is absolutely important. There was a kind of a thesis done at, or a study done at the University of Purdue that talked about college football players. They can take about, I thought it was about 1,200 hits over a year and recover with time off. Anything over that was cumulative onto the next year. So they never truly recover. And so what happens is a lot of these people, they were figuring taking 1,800 hits because it's college football. We don't care. We just grind them up, throw them out. And what was happening is some of these kids are, you know, they're done even after they can barely do anything because they've had so much severe head injury that, you know, they can't remember things. Short term is gone, all these little pieces. And they're coming out of school at, you know, 24 and already have all that damage. So there's a lot of stuff around studies around that is, and that's just normal hits. I'm not talking concussions here, I'm talking normal hits. So, Ron, we kind of burned through a lot of, you know, the kind of the list you put together. Is there anything else you want to throw in there? I have some other stuff I'd like to cover.
While we're on the armor part of it, I kind of forgot to put in my list that another bad habit a lot of fighters have is wearing too much.
Yeah.
Like I've run into any number of fighters over the years that would like get steel legs and put closed cell foam behind them because they didn't want to get their leg hurt. But you could just beat on it all day and it would be like hitting a pill. They don't react.
Right.
Or they would wear it way too, you know, and that's a different discussion. That's, you know, you're looking real bad out here because you're getting beaten down. And I mean, look at your leg armor. It's all crushed and bent up. And did you take any leg shots today? You know, so that, you know, that's the other half of the bad habit of people that are sort of paranoid about getting bruised, that they wear way too much armor. And that could limit how you can move. That can have its own set of problems, not just the acknowledgement part of it.
Yeah, I would agree there.
You want to fight the bad guy and not your gear.
Right.
So you know, I think, the person I was talking about was wearing a steel riveted halberd for a long part of his career. And what it ended up doing is actually wearing his joints out. So because your body's used to carrying a certain amount of weight, and it's just like somebody that, you know, once you get heavy and things like that, your knees start going, that's all extra weight on your joints. So his shoulders started having issues because I can guarantee, proof in the pudding here is that when I had I still have shoulder issues, different reason. But early off, I was wearing, and this is titanium. If my shoulder hurt, as it got fixed, I could fight without my mail on. As soon as I put that mail on, even walking around after a day of walking around in it, it would start hurting my shoulders because it's adding more weight on those. It's pulling. And so, you know, you just have to watch how much sometimes the extra weight is hurting you, and that you're prepared to deal with that. If that means put some extra weights on, that means warm up better. If that, any of those kinds of things, there's all kinds of things that help joints. So, that's just be aware is if you find yourself all your joints hurting, it may, and you're thinking, I didn't move that much. It may actually be the weight that's causing that. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to post later a number of articles that I was kind of burning through. And I thought, some of them were really interesting. I'll leave this one for the last. But Ron and I were talking early off that, we're talking about bad technical habits that we have to work past, and identifying some of them. There is that piece of working through. How do you get rid of a bad habit? Because what a bad habit is essentially an acquired behavior or a pattern that's involuntary because you've done it so often that it happens naturally. So we talk about training and trying to get things to that point where 10,000 blows involuntary now, right? But what happens if we do that 10,000 blows the wrong way? How do we fix that? And there's a lot of studies out there around that. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. So that, because I tell you the truth, I was looking through this thanks to Ron. He kind of made me dive down the rabbit hole here. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of information around this. And none of it's super easy. Because it's almost, I wouldn't have thought about trying to get rid of habits the way they talk about it, but it makes total sense. But let's talk about some habits that we also see that we don't think that even goes outside the fighting arena, although fighting tends to really spur this, and we see it in lots of other sports. Any sport really can spur these. And nerves while you're competing. That's a habit. Right? Quitting when it gets hard. That's a habit. Anger. After stress, after making a mistake, after losing, after having somebody not take a blow. Anger is it's not, you're not thinking, I'm going to get angry. So I'm going to show them how angry I am. That's not what you're thinking. You're like involuntary angry. Because you in our group, you can't get angry, but it still happens all the time. Involuntary habit. Cheating. I can't lose. Too much stress on me. Everybody's counting on me. You get to that point, that absolutely can end up being a habit. So, now we're digging into a different level of habit, right? And some of these, the good part about at least a couple of these is, and this is what Ron and I talked about, was that our group really looks poorly upon cheating and anger and quitting even. Quitting doing stuff is perfectly fine. We're good with people going ahead and quitting. But middle of the bout, not communicating and quitting something, that we were like, whoa, not a good thing, right? I don't like fighting as much as I thought. Quitting, it's all on them. If I agree or not, doesn't matter. It's all on you. That's still a habit. Maybe you might look back and say, how many other things did I quit? And so, be aware that, these are habits that are really hard to break, because most of these types of habits are developed when you're a kid. And so breaking becomes a super, super hard way to get there, to break some of the, how do you break the habit of quitting? There's a lot of people here love to know, how do you break the habit of getting nerves when you're competing, including me, because I get all, yeah. everyone's like, oh, well, you just go out there. It's no big deal. I'm like, no, there's still some. Yeah, exactly. Still get those butterflies a little bit. Right, guys?
Yeah.
So,
I have to keep it super light. Like before a tournament, I listen to Taylor Swift. Like I cannot listen to anything heavy. I cannot listen to anything serious. It's bubblegum pop, and let's keep it totally light and happy, because otherwise I get nerves. I get this is too important. I get all of those things, and so sweetness and light and Tay-Tay. That's what works for me.
Yeah, I'm just the opposite. I listen to the heaviest stuff I can get my hands on. It just makes me want to just destroy things. So this is a different philosophy, I guess.
No, yeah. Everybody's, in fact.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
they talk about how everybody handles things differently.
But as far as the bad habits like anger and cheating and all that, when I have a trainee that having problems with that, the first question I ask them is, do you like to fight or do you just like to win? What do you like to do? If all you like to do is win, then you're not going to last in the sport. I like to fight, win, lose. I mean, I've lost a lot of fights over the years too. I mean, you got to love this, or you're just not going to make it. And that and generally, when somebody's got anger issues, I'm like, like why are you, what is causing you to be so angry over perceived, slights of your opponent, like, because I've seen people that every time they touch their opponent, it's a big discussion and a freak out and drama. And I'm like, you don't actually enjoy this, do you? You just are in this to win. And that seems to be all you're into. So you got to make some decisions here.
Yeah. And I think, I think this is exactly, what you're talking about is, when, how do we get past that? And one is, how do we form new habits? How do we start that? And one is, it starts with communication. For a lot of these above, these really, especially anger, some of this comes down to exactly what Brennan and other people do. And that is, they find that place to take their minds off of it and let it calm yourself. They talk a lot about deep breathing exercise, index cards with words on them that remind you of these things. These are all, getting routines before you go out so that you can be in the routine, which is all about meditation state, really.
Right.
So what that does is helps you calm those scenarios. It's not actually necessarily replacing the habit, but what it's doing is giving you good habits to go in to control yourself, control your emotion.
It's building new habits on top of the crappy ones, right?
Exactly.
So that over time you have crushed them down enough that they don't show up as often. They never disappear, but they don't show up as often. So like for me, the left side of my armor goes on, and then the right side, and it is this very, like you talked about, this very meditative thing. It is all about building a place where I can do my best, and I am okay with somebody coming and beating the tar out of me, and I have to be okay with that. For me, I spent a long time where I had to make a conscious decision going into tournaments that it was okay to lose, because I was absolutely that high level unbelt that was mad about losing a tournament, losing a fight. Everything was so much pressure. I got to get knighted. I got to win this turn, and it was ugly in every sense of the word. And I almost walked away over it more than once.
Yeah, No, I agree. And I think you really nailed it with, and it's interesting because the article, you almost quoted the article, and that is you're building good habits and you're laying those on top. And sooner or later you build enough good habits that come out first that the bad habits get constantly pushed down in the line that you see them. Not that it never possibly come out again, but it does give you to the place where you're like, why did that come out? And you recognize it faster.
Yeah, no, I had within the last year, I've had a moment where I was in a list and I was not my best self, and I owed a lot of people an apology coming out of it because it was a backyard tournament that shouldn't have mattered at all, but for some reason that day the bad habit showed up, and you just have to log the work to say I'm sorry, and then rebuild the good habits on top of the bad one again.
Yeah. So, one piece they talk a lot about in helping people build better habits is the positive reinforcement of those good habits. So a person building habits will always, negative reinforcement actually does not work at all. I can tell you not to be mad all day long. You think that's going to change anything? Exactly. So the idea is that you positively reinforce that, because your mind is always looking for positive reinforcement. I'm going to eat that cookie. Later I'll bring up one I found funny. I'm going to eat that marshmallow. Okay. And it's because the reward is the taste. That reward could be anything. The reward is like, hey, as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to go outside and get some air. Right. And that's the reward. So positive reinforcement isn't a reward that your mind picks up and it wants more of. Nobody wants more negative. Everybody wants more of something that's positive and that they like. And you just can't get rid of that your mind just works that way. So a lot of negative comes out in defense. In other words, a child, you want a child to do something, they don't want to do it. So they get angry as a defense mechanism so that they don't have to do it. And so they grow up that way, and then that's their natural defense mechanism all the way through. So, it's all around that reward. Maybe the reward should be, hey, if you do your chores, then we're going to go and, we'll go out for a bike ride, or, something to some of those things that they like doing. And then next thing you know, that the habit is more of a, hey, if I do this thing, then I get to do other good stuff too. And that goes right into fighting as well. And this is how, we really work on changing habits. So, that was one of the articles, and that one based a lot around anger and these habits that we start really developing as a child. I'm gonna jump way down here because I'll share this article because it talks about teaching new habits rather than changing old habits. In other words, a lot of people spend time as like, I have this throw I use. Okay, well, we're going to change that throw to, and this goes right down to what you're talking about, Brennan. Let's tweak that throw, and we can try to tweak it, but unless they get positive reinforcement, and some of that will happen, is like, okay, we'll tweak it this way, and if they hit enough people with it, they're like, oh, well, maybe I'll go that. But sometimes it's easier to just say, hey, let's throw this new shot. It could be very close to their old shot, but with slightly different technique. But because we're going to even call it a different name, and we separate it. Our head is stupid, and it separates them. And now, I'm learning a new habit. It's really close to my old one, but it's a new one. And as that gets rewarded through hitting people, now, look, this new habit. I'd rather throw the new habit than the old habit.
In my head, onside and flat snap are two different shots. For exactly this reason, because I could not get myself to throw the flat snap the way I was taught. I had to figure out an onside. which was a flat snap that I just stepped different, right? But they are two different shots in my head.
All right. So yeah, and it's funny because this article also dives into using visualization, being able to see what we're doing. And Brennan, you kind of jumped into that one and earlier, and so we kind of covered this. But they talk a lot about sometimes when we see it, we can actually see, what's going on with the technique you're using, or it's like I had somebody at our practice. He's a count right now. In fact, I was like, stop reaching out for every blow with your shield. He's like, I don't do that. So we videoed him. He's like, what the hell am I doing? So it's sometimes people just don't know because that's involuntary, right? And we want good involuntary responses. Later we'll talk about chunking and some of that, where we put a lot of good responses together to create a reaction that you don't have to think through. But sure. Video is a huge one. Also, visualization in the other way around is watching or thinking about the technique you want to throw over and over and over again in your head.
And when you put those two together, right?
Oh, yes.
So you've watched the video of what you're actually doing that's good, and then you do the visualization of I do that and then I do step 2. So I throw this combo, but now I'm actually visualizing it the way I throw it. It's so much more effective. You can't beat the combo of the two.
No, I totally agree. So there's another method, and what we're trying to do is give everybody some methods to deal with those habits that they may want to look at changing, or maybe not changing, maybe developing a new habit that's very close to it. So, that's another way to look at that. So another one they talk about in changing habit is essentially, if you got to change, and this I think probably falls back to one of Ron's things, and that he brought up, and is that if you have an old habit, maybe bad technique that you've learned and that needs to actually be trained or changed, they talk about just changing what's absolutely necessary. So if you're really going to dig into a habit, don't break it down into, is like, okay, we're going to change these 5 things in this shot you do. Well, that's super hard. So what you do is you change the one thing and let that develop. A lot of times, and I am absolutely, Ron, I'm sure you've rolled through this too. I'm absolutely like terrible at it. And that is, okay, let's change this. He throws it 10 times, like, okay, now let's change this thing too. And then here's another thing. And here's another thing. Me, I don't mind keep throwing stuff at people. And I try to explain to them that you come out of this, I'm hoping that you only have 1 or 2 things that you're really looking for. And sometimes I'll put other stuff out there as a base at the end to give them something to think about when they leave, so they're not surprised next time they come back and we're covering it. Yeah. So go ahead, Ron.
When I'm untraining somebody from bad habits and they're fighting with technique, I don't give them too much all at once, because
that's important.
I tend to work on whatever I think the most egregious thing they're doing is first. Let's tackle the big thing and get that out of the way, and we'll work our way down the list. And I've also learned over the decades of doing this that you can't build Rome in a day. This is not a quick fix, because there are times that I've corrected somebody and I see them going right back to what they're doing 5 minutes later at practice, but the next practice I see they've altered what they did to what we discussed, and it just took them a while to get it, because if you've done something, they say is either practice makes perfect or practice makes permanent. you know, as you said, throwing 10,000 shots, but throwing them the wrong way. Well, it's what you do now.
Yeah.
So I find that I work on a little piece with them at a time. I see training somebody as a marathon, not a sprint. There's too many people that they just teach you throw shot A, throw shot B, and then throw shot C, and then go out there and kill things. I'm not that guy. If you say, Ron, I want to work with you, we're gonna, we're gonna work on all of you, and we're gonna work on it a piece at a time till we get you as right as we can get you.
No, and the good part there is I think going in with that to your student gives them a lifelong learning opportunity, right? Because that's and it is a lifelong learning. So why not train them as part of that? If they're here to win crown in 6 months, or tell you the truth, if they're here to win crown in 5 years, if that's all they're thinking about, they're probably not going to be lifers.
Nope.
So
now, I mean, having goals is not a bad thing.
No, 100%.
But if that's your only goal, then I mean, when I was a teenager, I had goals. I mean, when I was 16, I'm like, I want to be a Duke at 21, and I want to be a Knight at 18. I missed them both by a year.
Yeah.
But those weren't my total driving things. I enjoyed the trip there, fighting and training and learning and all that. But if you're just driven to do, I want to do X, and that's all you want to do, then you're right. You're, as Brennan likes to say, you're not going to be one of the turtles that makes it to the ocean.
Yeah.
I love that saying. I use it a lot.
I love that.
I think you can do both, though, right? You can train. You can spend 6 months going, all right, I want to, over the next 6 months, I need to improve X, right? My footwork needs to be better so that I can be competitive in this tournament that's 6 months from now. And you can work on that and still know that there's this whole world of stuff that you have to work on when that's done. But what I'm doing right now for the next 6 months is I'm raising my ceiling on this. And I'm not building a better mousetrap. I'm just raising my ceiling on this.
I think that's the key, though. I mean, you're talking about I'm for 6 months I'm doing this thing is a tiny bit, tiny piece to what a lot of times we hear is like, well, in 6 months I want to win that tournament. So
yep,
and that's what we hear a lot.
And I have trained that way, and I don't think it's inherently wrong, right? You can say I know that I need to improve these two things if I'm going to have a shot. I'm competitive now. I want to have a better shot in 6 months. And you can train that way for 6 months, but know that all you're doing is trying to build 2, maybe 3 good habits for those 6 months. And then you have to really build the better mousetrap.
Right. And I think really the big piece there goes in that you also recognize the success, even though you don't win the tourney, that you recognize the success that of the things you were working on. And because that success is important to building a habit. If your success is winning the tourney, then you may not keep that habit at the end. Like, well, was that worth it? And, the idea is like, am I better? Did I do better in the tournament? If you go into that and you look and you're like, I did better. You know what? Next year I'm going to do another, 6 months before.
Victory conditions are not the same as first place.
Yeah.
They are not even a little bit the same. My wife, bless her, deals a lot in victory conditions in our home, and deals a lot in them on the field, but deals a lot in them in our home. And what are you trying to achieve? And did you achieve it? And it's not the same as win the tournament, win the race. Did you finish the race?
Yes.
That's a huge victory condition.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to burn through a couple more because we're running out of some time. I will put these articles out on the YouTube, and I'll I'll even post them at the end on our in the comments. One big piece that we see all the time is reassure your student that it's normal to sometimes get worse before it gets better. I mean, we see that all the time, right? Expect errors, right? It's because, you know, it may not be a habit yet. It may not be truly ingrained. Or, you know, maybe that error is that you went back to a bad habit or what you thought would get you there. Or you know, it's like, okay, I couldn't hit him with my new habit. I'm going to go back to my old one. So, you know, be aware that you will fail, and you can double up and you can keep trying to move forward. And I think that's the piece. You can't just give it all up. You know, and then, you know, set processes towards goals. In other words, we just talked about that, you know, that whole practice, you know, winning the event. It's like, well, there's all of those pieces on the way. And it takes that reassurance constantly to actually ingrain a habit. So you want to make sure you're getting those. So that's another one of those big pieces. You know, it's like, if that's feedback from somebody saying that you look good, that you here, let's watch this video. Here's exactly where you did it right, and they can see it, and then they're like, oh, hey, I did it right there. You know, it becomes super important. So, well, we got about 5 minutes, and what I want to do is, Ron, you got anything? You know, there's a ton of good content here. Once again, I think we probably could have dove in and even had more time, but anything you want to kind of leave the audience with coming out of this whole habits talk?
What I generally tend to tell people when they want to do this is just, you know, find the best trainers you can, listen to them, and learn, and don't just find one person. You know, I'm a big believer in taking a little piece from this person, a little piece from that person, but like, understand how your body reacts to things. If something starts to hurt, stop doing it. Even if you win with every fight with it, eventually it's going to hurt you bad. You know, listen to people that have been doing this for a long time. That, you know, that how can I put this? You know, your greatest natural talent is listening and learning. Just because you've got an ability doesn't mean you can rely on it. You know, as I tell people who are really fast, forget your speed, learn how to fight. Or people who are really strong, don't just power your way through everything, learn how to fight. That way, if those attributes start to fade on you, and as we've all found out, as you get older, your natural attributes are going to fade. I mean, I'm nowhere near as fast as I was at 20. But I built a foundation that now that I'm 58 and horribly broken, I can still be effective at this. You know?
Yep, I totally. And I think that's, you know, one of the good parts about you coming on and putting this together is that, you know, you got that experience, and, you know, I guarantee we all probably been through some of those bad habits.
Yeah, so. I've had some terrible ones. In fact, I'm paying for some of them now.
Yeah. So, Brennan, what you got for us? I hope you enjoyed the session.
I did. I think I probably got incrementally better as a result of being here and listening to you two and having to think about what I'm doing myself. I think it is all a question of increments, and that's habits are increments. And for me, it is I have to do something for 3 practices to make it stick. And so when I am driving to practice, if I'm not on the phone with mom and dad, I'm thinking about what am I working on this week that I'm trying to make stick for another couple weeks. And so I think it is the thing I would encourage folks to take away from tonight is don't skimp on your helmet, and build better habits slowly. They're really, it's really incremental change.
So now I'm going to ask the real hard question to you. Ready, Brennan? What's next week?
Next week is.
Hey, you're cheating. You're looking up.
I'm thinking.
All right. What's next week?
Oh, you mean for the coach's corner?
What's next week's show?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I got it right in front of me. I had to throw you under the bus a little bit. So next week's show, we're gonna try, and this may change. We're still trying to line some people on this one, but it's really goes around making a welcoming practice. Welcoming covers a lot of things. Welcoming can cover somewhere where somebody feels like it's in the public. It has easy to get to. It has good people at it. It has engaging people. Has good trainers. All of those can make a welcoming practice. But also a welcoming practice is helping people, understanding people, and helping them in the way they learn. And I think sometimes we don't think about that as, oh, well, I welcome everybody that comes to practice. Well, welcoming might be is like, all right, somebody's not ready to get in Army yet. How do we help them? Do we run some, do we do foam? Do we maybe run, maybe they've never done sports at all. So we can start out real slow with easy, hey, here's some strengthening exercise, some push-ups against a tree. Here's some, we're gonna do some little fun stuff like quick chase drills. We're gonna maybe do some ladder work where it's very disciplined and it's easy for them because they're learning a certain pattern, and some people need to learn patterns to actually learn. So there's lots of ways to think about a welcoming practice. So we're gonna try to cover some of those. Hopefully it lines up, and it should be a good episode. But meanwhile, Ron, I really want to thank you for putting together a great list of things to talk about. I know you worked hard on it. Thank you.
Oh, it's all part of what we do.
Yep.
One thing I tell new knights at their vigil is one of our chief duties as knights is to replace ourselves. And by replace ourselves, I mean create a new generation by training, mentoring, and not just squires, but basically help raise the next generation. So, and I thought tonight's subject was a pretty important part of that puzzle.
I totally agree. Brennan, it was awesome to be able to sit through a show with you. You got good stuff. I love it.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Saib's out there. Saib, thank you for switching the show around and moving our videos and catching all of the messages and stuff. It was nice to have a producer allow us to kind of burn through what we're, all of what's in our head while you're doing all the real hard work in the background.
Anytime.
And of course, huge thanks to our audience and folks that are coming out and listening to us and wanting to learn and help others. And hopefully this goes a long way to do that. You can find us on just day to day out on SCA Coaches Corner discussion group in Facebook. All the events and episodes go up on our Facebook page that allows us to broadcast our episodes. And all the episodes reside over on our YouTube site, which is probably one of the best places. It's well organized there, we post everything up there. You'll find some other things, including some practices and some technique stuff and training things. So please go out there, give us a thumbs up, and then watch what comes out on the page so you can catch it later if you can't catch it on Friday nights. thanks everybody, and have a great weekend. Hopefully get out there, swing some stick, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.